Good morning, everyone. So let us start our session. Thanks for joining. So we were discussing about a tool called GitHub, and if we see the previous sessions, we follow the previous sessions, like we understood like how to create an organization, how to create repositories, all those things. And we have also seen what is the importance of creating branches, branching strategies, how to raise pull requests, all those things. So we were discussing about how can we push, how can we push the source code? How can a developer push the source code from his local machine to the GitHub repository? So usually either a developer or even if we wants to push some code, usually it is not necessary for us to learn. It is not necessary. Usually we will not push any code to the GitHub repositories as a DevOps resources. But these things are very important to understand. Like usually we will be working on the Git repositories. We'll be working on the Git repositories. Definitely, we should have a clear understanding of all the Git commands, how actually the code will be pushed into the GitHub repositories, all those things we need to understand. That's the reason why we are trying to understand all the Git commands. Suppose if this is the GitHub repository, if this is the GitHub repository, you see, I'm going here. I'm just clicking on your organizations, and here I have two organizations, as you all know. Let's click on the first organization called ICICI Net Banking, and here in this organization, I have three repositories. I'm just going for the repositories. I have three repositories here. One is ICICI credit cards, fixed deposit, savings account. And we also understood like why we are creating repositories like this. Why? Because today we are following the microservices strategy. Microservices strategy. Now, if we have an application, that application is divided into smaller piece of services, smaller services. If we have a large application, then we are going to divide that large application into smaller services like this. And we will be deploying into the Kubernetes. And in the GitHub, if you look at the repositories in the GitHub itself, we can understand whether we are following the microservices strategy or not. We are following microservices strategy today. The agile model. Today we are using agile model with DevOps tools implementation. And this is how we are going to deploy the services, dividing the large application into small microservices, separating the code for each and every service and deploying it to the Kubernetes. Any questions here in understanding what is a microservice? Why we are creating repositories here like this in the GitHub? If you have any questions, let's discuss. Otherwise, we will proceed. Right, fine. So if I take any one repository here, let's take any one repository. Let me take ICICI credit cards. And in this repository, as we all know, we have two branches. You can see here, we have two branches. One is the main branch, the other one is the feature branch. And I explained you very clearly what is the feature branch and all the previous sessions. Please go to the previous sessions to understand what is feature branch and what is the main branch and all. We have two branches here, and this is the code present in the main branch. These are the files present in the main branch. And if I want to view the files present in the another branch, we need to go to the drop down. We will select this particular branch, and we will look at the files present in the another branch. Here, we have an option here to navigate between the branches. We can select the branch and we can navigate between the branches, and we can see the files present in the branches. But usually we have options like we can add the files here. We can create a new file and we can add the file directly to the repository. Usually the approach is like developers use Git commands. Even we also use Git commands for pushing any of the files, for committing any of the things into the GitHub repository. So for that purpose, we need to learn some Git commands. That's the reason why we are understanding the architecture of the Git. We are understanding the architecture of the Git. So we stopped the last class. We stopped here. Like suppose if developer wants to push the code into the remote repository. Usually we know developer writes the code. Why we are taking an example of developer? Because usually most of the times developer writes the code and developers write the code and they used to push the code into the repositories. They used to commit the code into the repositories. Okay. So it doesn't mean that we are not going to we are not going to commit any of the changes like that. But most of the times developer use the commands, developer writes the code and they will commits the code into the remote repositories. We take an example, developer is writing a code and he's going to commit the code into the remote repository from his local machine I'm talking about. Consider developer is in his local machine, developer is developing the code in the local machine and he wants to push the code into the remote repository called GitHub. Try to understand, we are calling the GitHub as a remote repository. We are calling GitHub as a remote repository. Directly, he cannot push the code to the remote repository. Directly, he cannot commit. There is no shortcut. Directly, developer cannot commit the code into the remote repository. He has to follow an architecture. This is the architecture he has to follow. Anyone has to follow this particular flow to commit the code from his local machine to the remote repository. And if you understand this flow here, first we are talking about a working directory. Developer will create a working directory. He will create a folder. Developer will create a folder in his local machine, which is called as a working directory. He will create a folder, which is called as working directory. And all the files present in the working directory, first of all the files that are present in the working directory, those should goes to the staging area. All the files must be moved to the staging area. And from the staging area, the files must be moved to the local repository. From the local repository, the files must be moved to the remote repository. That's how usually the files has to move. Okay. So if you want to understand this particular architecture, I'm just showing you one example. Let me show you an example here. I'm going to create a folder here. I'm going to show you how actually the developer creates a folder and how he is going to add the files. I'm going to create a new folder. Okay. And usually we already created a folder. Let me see. It's okay. Can you see here? I'm deleting this particular folder. Okay, leave about that one. I'm going to create a new folder. And I just kept the name of the folder as sample repo. Can you see? I created a folder. I created an empty folder and just kept the name of the folder as sample repo. I'd like to open this folder and developer, you see here, if I'm doing anything, you just assume that developer is doing the same thing in his local machine. Developer created a folder on his local machine. And in the local machine, he just wanted to write some piece of code. For that, he created a file. Okay, he created a file and he's just naming the file as 1.java usually. Usually he will give some different names, okay? But I'm just taking an example, make you understand very clearly. And he's adding some files like 1.java, 2.java, and 3.java. Has added all the files like this. Once he added all the files, you see, this is the folder created by him. And inside the folder, we have 3 files. He has added 3 files. 1.java, 2.java, and 3.java. These are the 3 files that he has added. And now he wants to push all these 3 files into the repository, into any of the repository. Okay. He wants to push all these 3 files into any of the repository. Let's understand how he's going to push. First of all, he will open the Git bash terminal. He will open the Git bash terminal inside the folder where he has created the files. Can you see? He has created the files inside the folder. And he is going to open the Git bash terminal. I told you like how to install the GitHub, how to download Git bash, and how to install Git bash in your machine. So just go to the Google and search like Git bash download. Download the Git bash and install the Git bash in your machine. Once you install the Git bash, you can see like if you can search like here in the Windows. Okay, if you want to search whether the tool is installed or not, you can search like this. You see here Git bash is showing Git bash app. Okay, if it is showing like Git bash app, it is installed in your machine. Otherwise, there are many other ways to check. You see on here in the folder, inside the folder, if you want to open, you can give a right click, show more options, and you will find an option called open Git bash here. So you can open the Git bash like this also. Try to understand where we are opening the Git bash. I am opening the Git bash in my folder in the down. See, it has created a folder called sample repo. Inside the folder, we have some 3 files. What are the files that is present? If I want to see the list of files that are present inside the folder, I can give ls command and see these are the 3 files that are present, right? These are the 3 files that are present. And the very first command that developer starts, okay, if he's going to work on the Git, the very first command that he has to start is git init command, git init. Why? Because it is just a folder, and if he wants to make it as an empty Git repository, if he want to start with, okay, if he wants to start with, he will just run a command called git init so that the folder will become an empty Git repository. So far, that is a folder. And if you want to make it as an empty Git repository, he's just running a command called git init so that the folder will become a Git repository, empty Git repository. Okay, the folder is becoming an empty Git repository. Now you see, I'm just running a command called git status. I'm just running a command called git status. It is showing like all the files are in all the files. It is showing all the files are not being tracked. You see, when I'm running git status command, all the files are not being tracked. 1.java, 2.java, 3.java, everything is showing in red color only. If the files are showing in red color, we need to consider them as untracked files. Try to understand. If the files are showing in red color, those files must be recognized as untracked files. They are not tracked. These are untracked files. Hope you got it. Let me close. And I'm going to open the same thing. I'm going to create a new folder. I just wanted to make you one difference. I'm just opening a new folder. I would like to add a new file here. The same thing like that. You see here, I have added 2 files in this folder, right? This is a new folder altogether. And I'm going to open a git bash here. So in this folder, I'm running ls command so that it is clearly showing I have 2 files in this folder. And when I'm running git status command, Shahin, are you following? So when I'm running git status command, it is showing like not a git repository. What is the reason why it is showing like not a git repository? It is not understanding like it is not a git repository. If we want to make it as a git repository, what is the very first command that we need to run? You got it right. See, when I am running git status command, it is not showing like it is showing something like it is not a git repository. So that's the reason why what I'm saying. What is the very first command that developer run? Git init. Okay, before you see, you can run git status command to see what is the status of the git repository. If it is saying like it is not a git repository, you have to initialize. You need to run a command called git init to initialize the empty git repository. Now you run the git status command. Earlier it was showing differently. It was showing like it is showing like not a git repository. Now it is showing different. Got it? Hope you got it right. What we are doing, we are just initializing a git repository. I'm opening the sample repo folder. Here I have 3 files. I'm opening the git bash for git bash here. And I'm just showing like I'm just running a command called git status. So every time if you want to see the status of the repository, better you need to run the command called git status so that something will be shown. Here, when I'm running the git status command, the files are showing in red color, meaning git repository is already initialized, but the files are not being tracked. The files are not being tracked. And if you see the architecture really, if you see the Git architecture, what happens? First of all, developer will create a folder. He will initialize the Git repository. Developer will create a working directory and he will initialize the Git repository. He will add all the files. And all the files must be moved to which area? What is the next step? The files are present in the working directory and there the Git repository is initialized. The files must be moved to the staging area. From the staging area, the files must be moved to local repository. From the local repository, the files must be moved to remote. So now you see here, the files are, okay, I have 3 files. Let me close this window. I have 3 files here. All the files are showing in red color, meaning all the files are untracked files. If I want to move all the files to the staging area, still they are in the working directory. If the files are showing like this, the files are not moved to the staging area. If I want to move the files to the staging area, what is the command I have to use? Git add the file name. Git add file name. I'm running a command called git add file name so that the file will be moved to the staging area. If you want to see the status, I'm just running a command called git status. Can you see earlier all the three files were showing in red color? Now only two files are showing in red color and one file is showing in green color. Why? Because we have moved this file to the staging area. If I want to move all the files to the staging area, what is the command? If I want to move all the files to the staging area, I need to run a command called git add dot or otherwise git add star. This is the command. Okay, either you can use git add dot or git add star to move all the files to the staging area. So now I am running a command called git add star. You see here, now you can run git status command to see what is the status. I have three files. All the files were moved to the staging area now. Earlier, all the files are in red color. Now all the files are in green color. Okay, you need to remember like this. Okay, if all the files are showing in red color, these are untracked files. And all the untracked files must be moved to the staging area. What is the next flow? You see here, I am going to show you. This is working directory, right? In the working directory, first of all, he will initialize the Git repository. In the working directory, he will create a folder, okay? Developer will create a folder and he will initialize the Git repository. He will check whether all the files are in untracked stage or what is the status. First of all, the actual flow is all the files, if all the files are in untracked stage. In the working directory, usually the files will be in the untracked stage only. Okay, in the working directory, if he sees the status, the files will be in the untracked stage only. He needs to move all the files to the staging area. Can you tell me what is the command we are using? Moving the files from working directory to the staging area. If the files are in untracked stage, what is the command we need to use to move the files from working directory to staging area? Git add dot. So once the files are available in staging area, we need to move the files from staging area to the local repository. What is the command we use to move the files from staging area to the local repository? So we are going to run a command called git commit. Git commit. Sorry, this is not. Okay, now all the files are in staging area. Now we are going to use, if all the files are in staging area, what is the next step? We need to move all the files to the local repository. I am going to run a command called git commit -m. Git commit -m. And within the brackets, within the double quotes, you need to mention some commit message. I'm just giving the commit message like adding files. Git commit -m, adding files, okay? So let me run this command. You see, when I run this command, all the files move to the local repository. And if you ask me really to show where is the local repository, where is the staging area, I cannot show. Okay, I cannot show. This is the architecture of the Git. You need to run a git status command to see what is the actual status of those files. Are you getting my point? If I run the git status command every time, if you want to know the status of those files, you need to run git status command. And if it is showing all the files, nothing to commit, all the files are, if it is showing like this, nothing to commit, working tree is clean. If it is showing like this, the meaning is all the files are there present in the local repository. All the files are moved to the local repository. We have been moved. Okay, all the files were moved to the local repository from the staging area. If all the files are in local repository, we'll see this kind of message. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. What is the next step? Shahin, we have moved all the files to the local repository. What is the next step? Anyone hearing me? What is the next step? I think we need to move the files from local repository to the remote repository. Is it right? We need to move the files from local repository to the remote repository. Any questions so far? Any questions so far in understanding the architecture of the Git? So how to move the files from local repository to the remote repository? Let's understand. So we have a command. If I go to the repository, if I go to the remote repository, this is the remote repository. I have in this ICICI net banking, I have few repositories, 3 repositories are there. I would like to move the files to one repository, to the empty repository. Okay, consider ICICI fixed deposit. This is the empty repository. I don't have any code present over here. So far, I don't have any files present in the here. How many branches are there here in this particular? How many branches are there here in this particular repo? We have only one branch. We have only one branch in this repository, which is called main branch. I would like to copy the, you see here, if I want to copy the URL, if I want to copy the repository URL, this is the repository URL, you see, where we are finding the repository URL. This is the repository, and if I want to find the repository URL, you can copy the repository URL like this. So this repository is empty now. Here it has only one branch, and in that branch also we don't have any code except README file. We have only the README file. Apart from it, we don't have any code here. I want to move the code which is developed in the local machine. I have some code in the local machine. I want to push the code which is present in the local machine to this repository. So if I want to push the code to this repository, I need the repository URL. See, I am copying this repository URL. I'm going to run a command called git remote add origin, git remote add origin, and I need to use the repository URL. Can you see here? I am using a command called git remote add. So what is the meaning of this particular command? I am going to establish a connection from my local repository to the remote repository. So this is the remote repository URL. I am connecting git remote add. I would like to add all these files to the remote repository. Origin is the shortcut name, you see here. Origin is the shortcut name of this particular URL. You can give any name. You can give any name. I'm just giving origin as a shortcut name for this URL. See, every time you don't need to mention the entire repository URL. Instead of mentioning repository URL, okay, we are just fixing the shortcut name of the repository URL as origin. From the next time onwards, you can use origin as your repository shortcut name. Okay. Suppose if you want to fix the shortcut name of the repository as, see here, git remote add, I would like to give the shortcut name of the repository as ICICI fixed deposits. Okay, I can give like this, ICICI fixed deposits. Okay, I am giving the shortcut name of the repository as ICICI fixed deposits. Hope you understood what is the meaning of this particular command. Now all the files are available in the local repository. The next step is we need to move the files from local repository to the remote repository. If I want to move the files, you can see here, I am just trying to establish a connection between the remote repository and the local machine. I'm running a command called git remote add. Okay, while running the command, I'm running a command called git remote add. So this is the command. This is the shortcut name of the repository I'm providing. And this is the repository URL. This is the repository URL, remote repository URL. I'm running this command. Okay, once the command is executed, we can run a command called git push, and the shortcut name of the repository git push. This is the shortcut name, right? This is the shortcut name of the repository, and this is the branch name that I would like to push. And you see here, currently we created a repo called sample repo. And inside the sample repo, we are inside a branch called and inside the sample repo, we have a branch called master. By default, a branch is created. Either you create a repository inside a local machine. Okay, if you initialize a Git repository in the local machine, or if you create a repository in the remote machine, by default, a branch will be created. You see here, what is the branch that is created in your local machine? Master. And I would like to push the code. I am pushing the code to this repository called ICICI fixed deposits. And I would like to, I would like to push the code to the master branch. I'm running this command, git push ICICI fixed deposits master. Can you see here? We need to check whether this is done or not. Okay, you see here, writing objects 100%. Okay, let me go there and see. Can you see here? I'm just refreshing it. Earlier we had only one branch, right? Earlier we had only one branch. Now one more branch is created, which is called master. And inside the master branch, I have all the 3 files called 1.java, 2.java, and 3.java. This is how we are moving the files. We will be pushing the files from local machine to the remote machine. Okay. So let me explain you very clearly. let me explain you very clearly. If you have any doubts, we will discuss. Okay. If you have any doubts, we will discuss on that part also. And we need to understand many things here while working with the Git. It is very important also. Okay. Any questions? If you ask any question, then that will be interesting. Like so far, you understood any? You have any questions to discuss?
I won't see. So there is a Git repository URL, right? You have showed.
This is the Git repository URL. Yes. So usually we will create remote repositories. Okay. We'll create an organization. Under the organization, we'll create repositories. Each and every repository. Once you create the repository, you see, let me go to the savings account. So under the savings account, you see, this is also an empty repository. But if I want to know the repository URL, we need to go here and we can copy the repository URL.
Okay, but background the URL is same, but we are renaming it as ICICI savings account, right?
Yeah, it is not like that. Actually, this is the remote repo. This is the URL of this repository. I'm copying this repository URL. I'm just pasting it in the search bar. You see, directly I will be opening the repository. Okay, directly I will be opening
Okay.
the particular repository. Okay, so here I have used the shortcut name. If you see, it is not mandatory to use the shortcut name as ICICI fixed deposit. This is not the this is not the see. I am just adding. This is the repository URL. And every time I don't want to use the repository URL, I want to use the shortcut name for the repository. So if this is the repository URL and this is the shortcut name of the repository I got, you can give any name. Even you can provide your name also. Okay, I don't know Pavan or Venkat who is asking this question.
Yeah,
So
Pawan.
Venkat,
Pawan.
yeah, Pavan or Venkat?
Yeah, Pawan myself.
Pavan. So you see here, I actually it is not like you have to provide only the name of the repository like this. You can provide your name also. You can provide the repository name as Pavan, so that you will be fixing the shortcut name of the repository as Pavan. That's it. This
Okay.
is the shortcut name. You don't need to mention the entire GitHub repository, the GitHub URL every time. You can mention directly the shortcut name as Pavan. Okay, let me show you one more example so that you will understand very clearly
So
what I'm
one thing, Vamsi. So by looking at this URL, how can we say that it is Git repository?
by looking at this URL. This
Uh,
URL you're
yes,
talking.
yes, yes,
So you can see here, github.com is the website, right? You know, we already know
yes,
github.com is the website. And inside that github.com, we have an organization called ICICI Net Banking. And inside that organization, we have a repository called ICICI Fixed Deposit. That is the actual meaning of this repository URL. Usually, we need to copy this URL. We need to copy the URL from the remote repository only. We don't need to worry about, or we don't need to remember. Every repository you create, we'll go to this particular repository and we can see the repository URL. Repository URL is used whenever we want to push the code to the remote repository. We need the repository URL to push the code to the remote repository.
okay,
Whenever you create a repository, for every repository, there will be a repository URL. Okay. You'll find the path here. This is the URL. You can copy it and you can, by using the URL, you can push the code. Okay, let me tell you one more example to understand. Okay, let me tell you one more example. What I'm doing is now, so I'm deleting all these things. Okay, leave about all these things. So first of all, you must understand the flow. Okay, you must understand the actual flow of creating all these things. So now, tell me, I am going to create a new repository. I'm just creating a new repository called credit cards. Okay, see, developer can keep any name. Okay, he can create a folder and he can just keep any name for the folder that he's creating. So first he will create a folder and he will add some files he will add some files. Okay, he's going to create a file and he's going to save the name of the program as credit cards one.java. Okay, and he's going to create some files like credit card 2.java, like that. So these are the two files that he has added, and he wants to move these two files to the remote repository. If that is the requirement, first, what is the initial thing that he needs to do, Venkat? So he don't know actually in the beginning. So he has created a folder and he wants to make this folder as an empty Git repository. He wants to make this folder as a Git repository. He has created a folder and he has two files. He has added two files into this folder and he wants to push these two files into the Git repository. What is the process that he has to follow? Shaheen, what is the very first command that he has to do? He has to open Git bash in that folder. Okay. He has to open Git bash in that folder. Once you open the Git bash, he need to open the Git bash inside the folder where he is having the files. Okay. And now you see, I have opened the Git bash terminal inside the folder called credit cards. And initially, when I am checking with the git status command, what it is showing? Directly, if I'm going with the git status command, what it is showing? It is showing like it is not a Git repository. It is not a Git repository. So you need to be very careful. Like, so we need to create a Git repository first. We need to initialize the Git repository first. What is the command that we need to use for initializing the Git repository?
Git init.
Git init. So git init is the command we need to use for initialize the empty Git repository. Once after initializing the empty Git repository, you need to check Git status again. So now the files are being tracked. Earlier you see when I am running Git status command, it is not showing like it is not a Git repository. When I am initializing the Git repository, it is showing like there are two files and both the files are showing in red color. If the files are showing in red color, they are untracked files only. If the files are showing as untracked, what is the next step? Usually, he will create a working directory and he will see the Git status. If the files are showing in untracked, usually the files will be shown in untracked. If the files are showing in untracked, what is the, just writing here, okay, untracked. The files are showing in untracked stage, then what is the next stage? He will be moving all the untracked files to the staging area. So once he comes to the staging area, he will see the files as tracking. Okay, the files, he will see the files that will move to the tracking area or tracked area. Okay. Staging area is nothing but a tracked stage. Okay, tracked area. So here all the files are being tracked. Now all the files are in red color. If I want to move all the files to the staging area, what is the command we need to use? Git add
star.
Git add dot. All the files will be moved to the staging area. And if he wants to verify whether what is the status and all, he can run a command called git status so that all the files are in green color. So this is the only indication. If the files are showing in red color, they are untracked files. If the files are showing in green color, they are staged files. They are tracked files. Okay. They are tracked files. Now, what is the next step? Git commit. You need to move all the files. You need to move all the files to the local repository. If he wants to move the files to the local repository, he will run a command called git commit -m, and he need to use some commit message. He need to give some commit message. I'm just adding files like this, so that the files will be moved to the local repository. Once the files are moved to the local repository, every time we can see why, because if you are a beginner to the Git, okay, if you are learning now, then definitely we need to use git status command to track the status of every step. Okay, I'm just running a git status command. It's clearly showing that nothing to commit, working tree is clean, meaning there are no files to commit. Everything is clean. All the files are present in the local repository. If you see this message, it is nothing but everything is clean and all the files are present in the local repository. And if all the files are moved to the local repository, what is the next step? I have already shown you what is the next step. Okay, if all the files are present in local repository, what is the next step? We should move the files from local repository to the remote repository. That is the step. That's it. So to move the files to the remote repository, we need to use a command called git remote add origin. This is the shortcut name. Origin is the shortcut name. If you don't want to give the origin as a shortcut name, you can give something. Okay, I'm just giving the name of the repository as Pavan. And I would like to copy the URL of the repository. Let me go and copy the URL. I'm going to the ICICI Net Banking. Here I have a fresh repository now. There is no code in the ICICI Savings account. You see here, I don't have any code here. Okay, I don't have any code in the ICICI Savings account. You see only one branch here. And even in the main branch also, I don't have any code except the README file. If I want to copy the URL of this repository, paste it over here. Try to understand what I am doing. This is the repository URL. This is the repository URL, and this is the shortcut name of the repository. Got it? I'm just running this command. If I want to push all these files to the remote repository, I will simply use a command called git push. Git push. If I run the git push, it doesn't understand to which repository I need to push all the files. If you are using git push command, please mention to which repository you are meant. I just wanted to push the files to the Pawan repository. Why? Because Pawan is the shortcut name that I'm using. You understood now, Pawan? So this is the repository URL. I don't want to use this repository URL hereafter. Hereafter, the shortcut name of this repository is Pawan. You can use this repository URL, that's not a matter. But the shortcut name of the repository is Pawan. So I'm using Pawan. And to which branch you would like to push? If you want to change this to the master, yes, you need to push, okay? And you see here, we don't have, I just wanted to push all these things to the main branch. Why? Because in the remote repository, we don't have a master, we don't have a branch called master. And there the branch is main. If I run this command, let's see here, it is throwing some command. Why? Because the main branch is not present. We don't have main branch present here in the local, and you are trying to push the same branch to the remote repository. If the branch is present in the local, then you can try. If this branch is not present here you have a repository called credit cards, and the master branch, the entire code is present in the master branch. Okay, so that's the reason why you try to push the code to the branch name which is same here. Okay, you see here it is master branch. Here it is master branch, and here also I'm mentioning that this is the name of the repository and this is the branch called master. I would like to push this. Now you see your commit will be successful. Okay, your push will be successful. And when I go there and if I see the code and all in the master branch, I have a master branch created, and inside the master branch, I have two files. One is credit cards 1.java, credit cards 2.java. These are the files that I have been moved. Any questions here in understanding what is the architecture of the Git and how can we move the files from the local repository to the remote repository? Okay, so let's understand. Okay, there are many things to understand. First, hope if you understood, I will close this. Okay, I'm going to remove all these things. Okay, I don't want all these things here. Now that is fine. So, Pawan, now we have a repository called ICICI Savings Bank in the remote, in the GitHub. But I don't have this repository in the local. I want to clone this repository to the local machine. I want to clone this repository to the local machine. How to clone this? I want to clone this. And you see, before you clone, how many branches are there here in this repository, in the ICICI Savings Bank? How many branches are there?
2 branch.
One is main, other one is master.
Sure.
And usually, what is the default branch?
Main.
You know what about default branch? Whenever you create the repository, one default branch will be created, which is called main here in our case. But I don't want main to be a default branch. I want master to be the default. I want to change the default branch as master. Yes, it is possible. It is possible. You need to go to the settings. You need to go to the settings, go to the branches. Second. We can change the branch name. See here, we have two branches here. And you see here, this is the default branch. Okay, main branch is the default branch. And usually we can rename the branch to master. Otherwise, we can directly change the settings of the branch. Okay, directly change the settings of the branch. Go to the branch settings, branches. Here I'm not seeing any of the options. Okay, maybe see we are using the see we are using the community edition. We are not using the licensed version. We are not using the licensed version. If we use the licensed version, you see here we can organize the branches. We can go to the branches. We can set the default branch. We can set the default branch as we want. Suppose if main is the default branch, I will be having an option to set the default branch as master. Okay, since we are not using the community edition, we are not able to see here. So even if I go to the branches, here, I don't have much options, okay, except some branch protection rules and all. But if we use the licensed version, then we will be having all the options to organize the branches. Okay. So one thing you need to remember here, if we have main branch as the default one, we can also change the default as master. Okay. If you can make any branch as default. That's not a matter. Okay. You can make any branch as master. Currently, main is the default one. If you want master to be the default branch, yes, we can do it. If you want to update the master branch as default, we can do it. Okay, that's not an issue. Okay, if I want to clone this entire repository, I have an ICICI savings account, and if I want to clone the repository, of this particular one, how to clone this repository? I'm just copying the URL. And I'm going to open my Git bash on the desktop itself. Okay, you see where I'm here. I'm not into any of the folder. I'm just cloning the repository to the desktop. So what is the command I'm using is git clone the repository URL. If I use git clone the repository URL, what is the repository URL? You know, right? From where we need to pick up the repository URL? We can go here and we can copy the repository URL and we can paste it. Git clone. What is the command we are using? Git clone the repository URL. If I use git clone the repository URL, the entire repository will be cloned to your local machine. And you can see if I give ls command, it will show all the files present in my desktop. Okay, all the files are showing in my desktop. But you see, when I am going for what is the repository that I've created? ICICI Savings Bank. Okay, you can switch to the folder cd space ICICI savings account. Okay, ICICI savings account. I'm just switching to the branch called savings account. Okay, you can use clear screen also. I am inside, you see here on the desktop, I have cloned my repository. I have cloned the repository called ICICI savings account. It has cloned with a folder name called ICICI savings account. I'm just using cd command, change directory command to move inside the folder. And when I move inside the folder, it is clearly showing the default branch. This is the repository. This is the Git repository. That's why when I'm moving inside it, when I go inside this repository, it is clearly showing there is a branch called main. If you want to know what are the branches that we have, I can run a command called git branch. Only the main branch is cloned. Can you see? Only the main branch is cloned. If you clone the repository, okay, if you want to clone the repository, you can clone the repository by using a command called git clone and the repository URL so that the repository will be cloned. But you see, we have the code in the master branch, right? We don't have the code here in the main branch. We have the code in the master branch. And if you want to, I'm deleting this particular one. If you want to clone the master branch, I'm trying again, I'm opening the git bash terminal. Okay, again, I'm opening the git bash terminal. I'm running a command called git clone. This is the command I'm using. Before you run the command, if you want to clone the specific branch, I can run a command called I can run like this by using git clone -b master. I would like to clone master branch. -b stands for the branch name. Okay, branch name master. I'm specifying which branch I would like to clone. I would like to clone master branch. This is the repository URL so that if I run this command, only the master branch will be cloned. Okay, how to navigate inside the repository? So what is the name of the repository? What is the name of the repository? This is the name of the organization. And what is the name of the repository? ICICI savings account is the name of the repository. If you give cd space ICICI savings account, okay, this is the cd space, the name of the repository. Why? Because on the desktop itself, your repository will be cloned. If you go inside the repository name, cd stands for change directory. We are navigating inside the repository. And now you can see here, by default, it is clearly showing. What is the branch name by default it is showing? Master. After going inside this repository, it is clearly showing master branch. Why? Because we have specified the branch that to be cloned here is master. And even if you provide ls command, it will show all the files present in the master. It will show all the files present in the master. Now you can also see git status. If I run the git status command inside this repository, so you have only 2 files. All the files are up to date. Okay, there is no pending files. Your branch is up to date. Okay, your branch is up to date. Now I would like to add another file. Okay, and when I give ls command, you say I have two files here. I'm going to create one more file. I'm going to add one more file to this repository, and I would like to push. If I want to add one more file, how to add one more file? I'm doing like this. Okay, consider I'm creating an empty file. You know how to create an empty file, right? Touch space. If I want to create an empty file, credit cards 3.java.txt. This is the file I'm creating. Touch space credit cards 3.java.txt. And when I'm running ls command, you see I have three files. 1.java, 2.java, 3.java. But this is the file that I have added very recently. And you always need to run git status command whenever you add some additional files. Just now I have added one file called credit cards 3.java to the existing repository, but it is showing that this file is an untracked file. Can you see? This file is untracked file. I don't need to start from the git repository. Why? Because I cloned the git repository only. I cloned the existing git repository. That's the reason why it is not asking, it is not showing any error. It is a git repository only. ICICI Savings Bank is a git repository only. And when I added a file called credit cards 3.java, it is showing that this is an untracked file. This is an untracked file. How to move this untracked file to the staging area? What is the process now we need to follow? This is an untracked file now. What is the command? What are the commands that we need to use now? Git
Status.
git add dot. First of all, we need to move this untracked file to the staging area. I'm running a command called git add dot. And I would like to see the git status by running git status command. You can see here earlier it was showing like red color and it is moved to the staging area now. You can also commit this into the local repository git commit -m. I'm just mentioning that I'm adding 3.java. I'm adding credit card 3.java. Okay, this is for our reference only. Whatever the commit message we are providing here, adding credit card 3.java, whatever the commit message I'm providing, it is up to you. Okay, you can provide anything. I'm just committing into my local repository. See, I have not moved to the remote repository yet. Pawan, did we move this file to the remote repository? No. I just cloned the repository to my local machine and I have added one more file. This one. The file is showing in red color. If the file is showing in red color, it will not be moved to the remote repository. First of all, we need to move this file to the staging area, and then we need to move this file to the local repository. If the file is in the local repository, then we can push the code. I can simply run a command called git push. I can simply run a command called git push. Why? Because we are already inside the repository called savings account and inside the master branch only. We don't need to mention anything except git push. Even if I run with git push command, the file will be moved. The file will be moved to the remote repository. Simply, you can push the files by using git push command so that your file will be pushed. And you see here, when I am going to the master branch here, earlier I don't have any file called credit card 3.java. Just now, 1 minute ago, I have moved the file called credit card 3. Can you see? The remaining files I moved before 14 minutes. The remaining files I moved 14 minutes ago. Now I am adding a file called credit cards 3.java just 1 minute ago.
But Vamsi, you told that we need to give the name where to push, right? We need to specify the name.
Yes, that is, see, if you are not cloning the repository from the remote, okay? So if you are not cloning the repository from the remote, if you are doing a fresh push into the remote repository, that time you need to mention the repository URL and the repository shortcut name as well. But we have already cloned the existing repo only, right? So I cloned the existing repository. If you clone the existing repository to your local machine, after that I made some changes. Again, if I want to push, you don't need to mention anything. Git push is enough.
Okay.
You understood, right? This ICICI savings account master is the existing repo in my GitHub. I just cloned it. And I'm adding some additional files into it. And I'm using these git commands like git add, git commit, git push. Only this thing. This command is enough. You don't need to establish a connection. Why? Because you have already cloned the existing repo from the GitHub. Any questions? So if you are creating a fresh, if you are going to push the first time, okay, if you are going to push the files for first time, and if you are not cloning the repository from the remote, then you have to mention the repository name as well. Hope you understood. Any questions? Yes. Okay. Please go through the recording once. Okay. And please practice. Okay. You have to practice. So try to create a repositories in the GitHub, and in your local repository, try to create a folder, add some files, use all the Git commands. Try to push all the files from your local machine to the Git repository. This will be very helpful. It is very important to acquire the skill of the Git. Okay. Why? Because in our day-to-day activities, usually it will be very helpful for us. If you don't have any questions, let's stop it for today. Okay. Please practice whatever the things that we have seen today. Please practice all those things. Then we will be discussing further things like we need to use how we need to create branches and all. We will use few more Git commands to create the branches, all those things. We will see it tomorrow, the next session. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you all if you don't have any questions.